afternoon, doctors. Thank you for logging in for today's webinar, which is on the surgery of the brain stem. This is truly an international webinar with speakers joining us from Czech Republic, Dr. Vladimir Benes, and our own Dr. Atul Goyal is right now joining us from San Francisco. This webinar comes to you with the effort of Dr. Chandrasekhar Pujari, sir. And sir, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to carry this webinar.
Okay, so
this is coming to you through digital initiative of DG Neuro from Health&U. Health&U is a joint venture from New Link Company Limited, Japan, a pharmaceutical company. I now have pleasure to hand over the session to Dr. Atul Goyal, who is head of neurosurgery KM Hospital and senior neurosurgeon at Leelavati Hospital. Dr. Goyal sir is a prestigious Dr. B.C. Roy National Award winner in 2003 for his outstanding research. Sir has also been awarded with ICMR twice in 1995 and 1996. Sir has also won a gold medal Shinshu from Shinshu University, the Shinshu Gold Medal, for his tremendous work done there. Sir has some of the largest published experience in the world in trigeminal neuroma, suprasellar meningiomas, collateral cyst, and craniovertebral anomalies, and many more. Some of the subjects I cannot even spell. So, sir, you are truly a stalwart in your own field, and we have pleasure to have you here. We now hand over the session to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we will enjoy this very fantastic session. And this session has been organized by Dr. Chandrasekhar Dev Pujari. And we all know Dr. Dev Pujari is one of the senior most neurosurgeons of our country and one of the prized possessions of our country. He was the president of ISPN and he has several laurels on his shoulders, but never on his head. He is indeed truly an international neurosurgeon, and he has done tremendous work on various subjects, particularly on pediatric neurosurgery, on endoscopy. He has been a stalwart in promoting endoscope in our country in various, recently I understand he's also doing for spine, for nasal endoscopy, for intracranial endoscopy, and microneurosurgery. So I don't want to go on this subject because he's really a loved and a very favorite neurosurgeon of all young and old neurosurgeons alike. I'm very happy to be on the stage with you, Dr. Dev Pujari. It is my indeed great pleasure. The other hero of our today's seminar is Dr. Benes. And I am sure all of the young and old neurosurgeons listening to this today's show know this great personality from Prague. He's also one very fantastic, loved neurosurgeon and a great neurosurgeon. I indeed have a very great pleasure in knowing him for so many years. He also, I know he likes my work and likes me personally. And I am very happy and proud that he's here. One most important facet of his personality is that he's, if he has an opinion, he's not afraid to give that opinion in front of anybody in the world. If he has an opinion that endovascular surgery is good for this, microsurgery is good for this, his opinion, he is not afraid to give in any forum in a very loud and prominent way. So welcome to this show, Dr. Benes, and we are looking forward to your presentation. The other two younger people on the screen are Dr. Sukhdeep Jawar and Dr. Abida. And both of them will be giving their presentation on brainstem, the complex anatomy. And Dr. Sukhdeep has done this micro dissection that you will see. And you have to admire this dissection, which I feel is the best dissection of the brainstem in the world by far. And Dr. Benes you have to give your opinion after this presentation that yes, it was the best dissection you have ever seen on brainstem in the history of neurosurgery. Of course, he has been trained by various people in the world, and without mincing any other words, I will hand over the mic to Dr. Sukhdeep Jhawar to start his presentation on anatomy of the brainstem in all its glory and all its beauty. Over to you, Sukhdeep. I know you will not disappoint me, but I want this answer from everybody in the audience saying, yes, this is the best dissection of brainstem ever seen by them. Sukhdeep.
Thank you, sir. Thank you indeed. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for this opportunity to present my work here in front of this international audience. So of course, Dr. Goel has very kind words for junior consultants like us and very encouraging words. And brainstem has always been a very very, you can say, very complex area, and the anatomy, when we are reading about this, is, I can't see my screen, just give me a moment. So this brainstem, as you can see here, is very complex area, and it's been a dissection. Most of this been done in the KEM hospital and some other parts of the world. And here you can see the cross section of the brainstem. It's the mid-sagittal section, and you can see how the brainstem is holding the whole brain, and how all the fibers and all the anatomy of the supratentorial brain, it comes down and converges into the very compact area of the brainstem on its way to the spine and the rest of the body. So you see, brainstem is not merely a conduit to transfer all these fibers to the rest of the body. There is a lot of reorganization also going on inside the brainstem. Many fibers, they are crossing from right to left, then they are crossing back from left to right. So in this, there are crossing fibers, then some fibers, they are ending in the brainstem and some are starting from the brainstem. So it's a very complex area with a very narrow area, and there is a lot of reorganization of fibers. There is organization of gray matter, and you see all the cranial nerves except our olfactory and this optic nerve, which you can see are basically the extension of the brain. But all other cranial nerves, they have their origin from the brainstem, and some of them, they are ending in the brainstem. So when you are dealing with the pathologies in the brainstem area, so you have to be you have to be aware of this anatomy. So you will see how these tracts and how these areas, how these fiber tracts, how these nucleus, they are related to your pathology, how it is distorting the normal anatomy and giving you access to reach that safe access to reach that particular pathology. So once you understand this anatomy, this will become quite easy for you. And we as neurosurgeon, we understand the importance of all these tracts, all this anatomy. Even a small damage to a perforator can be devastating to the patient for rest of his life. So this is the posterior view of the brainstem. This is the usual anatomy which we see when we approach the brainstem from posterior aspect. You see here, but this whole area mostly is covered by, here you can see this is covered by the cerebellum, but then we know how to get access, how to make ways to reach even to the side of this area or to the front from behind. And this is how you reach your floor of fourth ventricle, tilo-velo, tonsillar approaches. So coming to the brainstem, I will just give you the overview of the anatomy from front, from behind, and from the side. And Dr. Abida will be talking little about approaches to these areas, which are the safe approaches, how you can reach there, and which part of the brainstem you can enter. So you can see this is the whole of the brainstem. So from the ventral aspect, you get a very nice view. You can see the brainstem here. Pons is the most prominent part, which we generally is the most bulging part of the brainstem. But apart from pons, you have a very hidden midbrain here, and then you have the compact medulla here. So this is the close-up of the You can see here the midbrain here. You can have the optic nerves here, both the mammillary bodies. And then you have the cerebral peduncle on the ventral side with the interpeduncular fossa from where your third nerve is coming out from the interpeduncular fossa. And then you have this posterior perforated substance with all the perforators of your basilar artery and posterior cerebral arteries going to the brainstem here. So this is the view of the medulla here. Medulla very prominent, lot of transverse running fibers you can see with a median kind of this groove here for the basilar artery here. And you can see small perforator entrings here and there. And then you have the fifth nerve, which is the main nerve of the medulla here. It's arising quite laterally. You can see in the right, in between the middle of your pons, but quite laterally here. And at the pontomedullary junction, we have sixth nerve arising medial, then seventh, eighth, and the seventh, eighth complex here. So this is the view of the medulla. You have pontomedullary sulcus. Then the most prominent aspect here are those two pyramids here, which are the corticospinal tracts going downwards before crossing. And this rounded structure are the olives. So you have a pre-olivary sulcus and one post-olivary sulcus. And we have our 9th, 10th, and 11th nerves arising from post-olivary, and the 12th nerve arising from the pre-olivary sulcus. So first, let's see the dissection, fiber dissection of the ventral brainstem, the front of the brainstem, or the anterior aspect. Just to give you overview of the anatomy, which we will be seeing here, is the mainly most of this anterior aspect is covered by our pyramidal tracts, or we call them corticospinal tract, and they are coming from internal capsule, then into the cerebral peduncle, then deep part of the pons going to the medulla, and in the lower end of the medulla, they cross to the opposite side of the spinal cord. So we have this corticospinal tract running all the way. And on deeper dissection, you have other, here you have in the brainstem, in the midbrain, you have the red nucleus, substantia nigra, then you have the medial lemniscus, which is our sensory tract, sensory lemniscus, which is running all the way up towards the thalamus. So this you will see on the deeper dissection here. And of course, laterally, you have lateral lemniscus here. So coming to the dissection, this is your, you can see the pons. Here we have done the superficial fiber dissection. So superficially, we have mostly this transverse running fiber from one side to the other. And these are the transverse pontine fiber with transverse. There are many pontine nucleus. These fiber mainly goes to both the cerebellums here. So when you do little more dissection, this is again here you midbrain on the front side. Now you have done some superficial dissection. Here we have removed some part of the peduncle to show the substantia nigra here. And substantia nigra comes all the way to here, oculomotor sulcus, from where the oculomotor nerve is coming out. So on the medulla, we have all these fibers coming in very close, very narrow area. So sometimes there are a lot of crossing fibers, so the dissection gets more difficult, but you can define few tracks if you try to trace them. Like this, the pyramidal tracks, then we have olive here, and these are the cranial nerves here. And these are the external arcuate fibers, which are part of the sensory pathways. So on the deep dissection, basically in the pons, these transverse fibers, they are superficial and the deep transverse fiber. In between them, we have our corticospinal tract, which is going downwards towards the medulla. So these are the deep transverse fiber and these are our corticospinal tracts here. So this is all in a three-dimensional configuration. So we have to understand the whole of most of the bulge, which we are seeing in the medial part of the pons, is due to the corticospinal fiber pushing this transverse fiber outward. So this is once you go in the deep of the transverse fiber, then you see this, our lemniscus fibers, which are sensory fibers. So after the crossing, this medial lemniscus, it goes upwards, then it's like a flat structure. So if you go more deep, then you can see here, we have made a small opening in the fourth ventricle, and this is the area of the aqueduct, you can say, and just close to that are our medial longitudinal fibers. So this is these are another fiber which connect different part of the brainstem, third nucleus, sixth nucleus, and to the neck, nucleus of the neck. So these are the medial longitudinal fibers. Then we have if you go little central tegmental fibers, then we have our trigeminal lemniscus, which is again has a trigeminal nucleus. Then it's going upward is the mesencephalic part of that nucleus, and then we have a spinal part of that nucleus. So now you can see this is a trigeminal meniscus going up from here, and this is the locus ceruleus. These are the colored pigmented kind of cells which are part of the trigeminal nucleus here. So we have our central tegmental, medial longitudinal fasciculus. All these tracts, they are so very close and very fine. And if you can carefully dissect them, it's very difficult sometimes. But when you open this, then you can see here, now I can see the roof of the fourth ventricle. You can see this is the impression of dentate nucleus, the roof of this. So this is the roof here. This is all of the, we have removed the part of the pons. Of course, we have removed some medulla just to show this anatomy of the roof of the fourth ventricle here. And this is the lower part of the roof where you can see tila choroidea and other part of the choroid plexus here. So this is our dentate nucleus impression of that. Then you have superior medullary vellum here, which is connecting this. From here, you will see the superior cerebellar peduncles going upward towards the red nucleus, then on their way to the thalamus. And between two peduncles, we have superior medullary vellum. And similarly, we have a thin tissue inferior medullary vellum, which will be important when you are approaching these areas. So just to give you an idea of how these fibers are related in the cerebral peduncle, you can see this, we can divide it into 5 parts. And the medial 2/5 is mainly the frontopontine fibers. And then the 3/5 in the middle is our mainly corticonuclear and corticospinal fibers. And lateral 1/5 is mainly our temporo-occipital pontine fiber. So these are more critical here, this middle 3/5 of that brainstem. So you can see these fibers are traced now here. And these are deep to the superficial transverse fibers here. So here, in another view of that dissection, you can have the mammillary bodies here. You can have some optic chiasma, and how these are related to the uncus here, part of the temporal lobe, temporal horn here. And this is our fibers going downwards in the brainstem. So this was the frontal view. Coming to the dorsal view, dorsal brainstem is technically floor of the fourth ventricle. So of course we have the dentate nucleus here in the cerebellum, superior cerebral peduncle, which I just showed, and this is the superior medullary vellum here. And then we have our floor of fourth ventricle, which I will be showing. The most prominent, of course, is the facial colliculus, median here, septa. So coming, and on the deep dissection, we have our 4 quadrigeminal bodies. Then we have fifth nerve here, nucleus. Of course, let's go to the dissection. So this is the lateral view. Again, same view, superior collicular, inferior collicular, fourth nerve, middle cerebral peduncle. And this is the peduncle of the cerebrum here. So this is the same view as you see here in this photo. This is the view. So we have the pineal gland, superior colliculus, inferior colliculus. So we have infracollicular approaches. This is the fourth nerve coming out and going to the front. So this is the only cranial nerve which arises from the dorsal aspect. Then it turns around and goes to the front of the brainstem. And this is the pulvinar of the thalamus here. This splenium has been cut here. So this is the overview of the dissection. You can see the choroid plexus with the pulvinar and thalamus. Of course, these are the structures of third ventricle. You can see mammillary bodies. This is pineal gland, superior colliculus. It has superior brachium, which goes, superior colliculus is mainly the visual cortex, part of the visual apparatus, goes to the lateral geniculate body. Inferior is mainly concerned with our hearing, auditory, and this goes to the medial geniculate body. So then we have these, both the dentate nucleus, superior cerebral peduncles, and this is the vellum here. So here one side we have removed this chordate nucleus and these structures here, and on the other side the dissection of the floor of fourth ventricle has been done. So this is another specimen. Now we have removed the this also from this side. So this is undissected part of the floor of fourth ventricle. Here we have done some dissection. So if you see, this is the median septa here, then we have lateral limital sulcus limitans here, and just lateral to it, that pigmented cell which I showed you from the front, this is our locus ceruleus. And the most important is the facial colliculus here, which is not exactly the facial nerve nucleus. It is the nucleus of the sixth nerve, abducent nerve. And the fibers of the seventh nerve, when they come, they come dorsally to the lower end of this nucleus. Then they take a bend here, goes forward. between the nucleus and the trigeminal again goes out as the seventh nerve here. So you can see how the seventh nerve nucleus, it takes this turn and form this bulge here. And medially, it is related here to the medial longitudinal fasciculus, which is again the internuclear tract in the brainstem. And below that, we have our vagal triangle. Then we have hypoglossal triangle. Hypoglossal is more medial because hypoglossal, sixth nerve and third nerve, these are pure motor nerves which has a nucleus which is close to the midline. And sensory nucleus, they are more far away from the midline. That is because of the embryological embryological, you can say, rotation of the brainstem. So we have the cochlear nucleus, then we have vestibular areas here. And this is the stria medullaris, which is the transverse running fibers in the middle of the floor of the ventricle. So you should understand all this anatomy very carefully when you are doing these approaches. These impressions, they act you as your landmarks. So where to take incision, supral colliculus, infracolliculus, close to the superior fovea. So if you know this anatomy, then they will guide you. So this is here you can see the dissection has been completed on the other side also. This is the cryptus circumtorius, which is the nib-like apex of this floor of the fourth ventricle. So you can see again this seventh nerve nucleus coming, taking a round and going as the seventh nerve. You can even see the seventh nerve here. And this is the medial longitudinal fasciculus. So again, these are again this medial longitudinal central tegmental tract, our trigeminal, this is a trigeminal mesencephalic part of that. Then we have the nucleus here. This is the pigmented locus ceruleus fibers here. So this is the bottom of the fourth ventricle, bottom part of the floor. So we have the hypoglossal triangle, vagal triangle here. And this vagal triangle has multiple parts due to nucleus of tractus and dorsal vagal nucleus. Now coming to the mid-sagittal section, just to have a view of this anatomy. So this is the view of from the side. We have the fifth nerve here, seventh, eighth here, middle peduncle. This of course is predominantly covered by the middle cerebral peduncle lateral view. And we have approaches which are, you can see this is considered to be the safe area, infratrigeminal or peritrigeminal approaches to the brainstem. And on the depth, you can see trigeminal nucleus here, then the peduncle here, lateral lemniscus, superior peduncle. So this is the lateral view. You can see the flocculus here, and this flocculus is again related to the seventh, eighth nerve. This is the fifth nerve here. So from the front, you can see fifth nerve is here. These are the flocculus here and the choroid plexus, which is related to your seventh and eighth nerve. So this also acts as your landmark when you're coming from side to locate these nerves. And another point is how close seventh, eighth nerve is to your ninth, 10th, 11th. Sometimes they are so close, it's difficult to differentiate where the other nerve is. The cut section here, substantia nigra with the peduncle and part of the red nucleus here, you can see red nucleus. And in the angle between red nucleus and the substantia nigra, this little, you can say, grayish area, this is the medial lemniscus here. And of course, this is the aqueduct and periaqueductal gray matter. This is external arcuate fibers over the olive. These are again, some of the internal arcuate is your sensory decussation. And some of this external arcuate, they again join that decussation. So this is the midsection here. You can see part of the floor. This is the roof of your fourth ventricle here. Then we have dissected this area, showed this pigmented cells here. This is the sixth nerve nucleus again here. So this is the sixth nerve now coming like this, going to the pontomedullary sulcus here. And your medial lemniscus, it forms a concavity here and all the way. It becomes flattened here, then goes to your midbrain. This is again the midsection here. Now you can see even the fifth nerve nucleus we have tried to dissect. This is the fifth nerve here. So this is the frontal view just to show fifth nerve here. So coming to being due to shortage of time, I'm a little fast. This anatomy is very complex. It needs a lot of practice, lot of dissection to understand this relationship of various nucleus and structure. And you can see how this corticospinal tract, which is the most important tract for us, going all the way from here, your corona radiata, internal capsule, internal capsule, and you have the optic chiasma. Then it becomes in the peduncle here. From peduncle, it goes to your pons, then the medulla, then it is crossing on the other side here in the pyramidal decussation. So you can see all our corticospinal tracts in all its glory. And with this, I end this dissection. Thank you. Thanks. Hello.
Sorry,
Yeah. Can you hear?
sir, unmute. Sir is muted.
Okay.
I can't see anybody.
Yeah, Sukhdeep, that was a fantastic presentation. And there is no question, and I have no doubt this was the best dissection ever done on the brainstem
Thank you, sir.
in the history of dissections. Now, I want Vladimir to give a comment if he's there on the screen. Vladimir?
I am. That was extraordinary. As you have said, Atul, it's great. I
Thank you.
only am sad that in a real life you do not see this. That would be
Yes.
extremely helpful to see that. But
Yes, of course, I would love to show them in 3-dimensional or in the live also. But
no.
here
I
do
mean
not-
during surgery. If you would
Yes,
see
of
this
course.
during surgery,
Of course.
paper.
Yes, but
In
I have
theory, it must be fantastic. But even this is really, Atul, as you have said, this is the best ever dissections I have seen.
yes.
Thank you, Vladimir.
Thank you.
Very good.
And now I move on to Dr. Abida. And Abida is one of the very rapidly emerging neurosurgeon of the country and of the world. She has got several awards to her credit. She was awarded the best lady neurosurgeon of the world and given an award by the AANS. And then she was awarded Vesalius Award for her work on white fibers in USA, also in AANS. And you will see her work, and her work has been quite fantastic in white fiber dissection and various other, not just limited to anatomy, but surgery. And she's an emerging star, there's no question. So like I said, that you will see the best dissection. Now, Vladimir, be ready to answer what you see now. Okay, Abida, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I will start sharing. So is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. So Sukhdeep has beautifully shown you the intrinsic anatomy of the brainstem. When you look at it, when you look at the brainstem, when you are trying to study it, you feel it is complex. I'm never going to be understanding it. You don't see the brainstem from a 3-dimensional perspective. What we study are cut sections. And when we just study cut sections, we will never get an overview. So what we have done is we have simplified this anatomy of the brainstem based on our white fiber work. And I will show you the safe entry points to enter the brainstem based on this work. So this was our paper that we published in World Neurosurgery last year. So basically the brainstem is made up of two things. It is a compact structure made up of closely related gray matter and white matter. The gray matter is basically the cranial nerve nuclei and some native brainstem nuclei like your superior and inferior olivary nuclei, your red nucleus, and all those nuclei. What we have done to the white matter is divided into these three parts. This has never been looked at in this perspective, and I'm sure you will enjoy this way we have divided the white fiber of the brain. So what we have done is we have divided them into projection fibers. These are like the projection fibers in the supratentorial compartment. They connect the cortex, the diencephalon, to the brainstem. The traversing fibers are fibers that go through the brainstem from the cerebrum to the spinal cord, but they do not synapse in the brainstem. They are just using the brainstem as a conduit to go from the cortex to the spinal cord. And association fibers are intrinsic brainstem fibers that connect various brainstem nuclei, and also they connect the brainstem to the spinal cord. Now let's look at all these fibers. So basically the brainstem can be viewed as the Greek mythological feature, that is Atlas, who is holding up the whole celestial heavens in his hands. And this is how the cerebral peduncles are. They hold the whole cerebrum in both their peduncles. So they're holding up the whole head for you to see on the brainstem. And the next part of it is this myriad of pyramidal fibers that you see running from the cerebral peduncles to the pons and all the other fibers that we will see now one by one. So what we have done is we've divided the white fibers of the brainstem into 3 zones. You have one zone, the outermost zone is zone 1, a middle zone that is zone 2, and a third zone that is zone 3. So these are like cylinders, one in each other. So once you see in this cut section view, you see this is the innermost zone or zone 3, and these are the fibers that it will enclose. Then your zone 2 covers this whole yellow circle that you see in this area. This is your whole zone 2 that runs around the brainstem. And your zone 3 is on the extreme periphery of the brainstem, and it is open anteriorly and posteriorly. So here and here, there are no fibers of zone 1. So this is how we are going to view the brainstem, and how then these zones help you to enter the brainstem without causing problem. So if you see from the dorsal and ventral aspect, this blue cylinder is the zone 1, this yellow ellipse is zone 2, and this green circle inside is zone 3. Similarly here, you don't have any zone 1, you just have zone 2. Inside you will have zone 3, and this is your zone 1. So what are these zones? Zone 1 consists of the short projection fibers. So these are fibers that connect your brainstem to adjacent geniculate bodies and cerebellum. So they are very close to each other. They have a very small journey connecting the adjacent structures to each other. And these are the superior, middle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle, the superior and inferior brachium, and the lateral lemniscus. So once you see the view of the brainstem, this is what you have. These are your superior and inferior colliculi, and this is your superior and inferior brachium as they go to the geniculate body. This is a part of the superior cerebellar peduncle with the lateral lemniscus. So this is what you see from the dorsal aspect. When you turn the specimen and you see from the ventral aspect, you see here again portions of the superior cerebellar peduncle, the lateral lemniscus, and some portion of the middle cerebellar peduncle. And here you have the inferior cerebellar peduncle. And anteriorly, you will see more clearly the middle cerebellar peduncle. So this is zone 1, which is present on the lateral aspect of the brainstem. Zone 2 is traversing and long projection fibers. Traversing fibers do not synapse in the brainstem. They are the corticospinal, the spinal lemniscus, and dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar tracts. And the long projection fibers are the medial and trigeminal lemnisci, the corticobulbar, corticopontine fibers, and the reticulospinal, rubrospinal, and vestibulospinal tracts. So let's see how they are organized. So this here, this yellow circle here is your superior cerebellar peduncle. So that is your zone 1. These blue structures here, blue circles here, are your zone 2. So you have the zone 1 outside. Inside you have a whole cylinder of zone 2. So you have your corticospinal tract, and in this region you have the medial lemniscus and all the other corticopontine, corticobulbar fibers. This zone here, in the middle, right in the middle, is your zone 3, which consists of the medial longitudinal fasciculus and the central tegmental tract in this region. So once you look at it from anteriorly, this is your zone 2, where you have all the corticospinal tracts mainly, and the corticobulbar and corticonuclear fibers. When you see from the dorsal aspect, you have your medial lemniscus and your trigeminal lemniscus, all forming here in the lateral aspect, close to the inner zone here. All this anatomy has already been discussed with Sukhdeep, so I will not go into that. And this is on the inferior aspect of the medulla, where you have the dorsal and the ventral spinocerebellar tracts that are going upwards via the inferior cerebellar peduncle and then via the superior cerebellar peduncle. And your last zone is your innermost zone. And as all innermost areas have to be protected, these are crucial fibers, and you do not ever need to enter this zone. And this constitutes the medial longitudinal fasciculus, the tectobulbar tract, and the central tegmental tract. And this is the area in the brainstem where they are. Right in the midline is the medial longitudinal fasciculus, just lateral to the medial sulcus, and next to it is your central tegmental tract. This is, of course, your zone 2, where you have the trigeminal lemniscus and the medial lemniscus, and this is your locus coeruleus. So the relevance of the classification is that zone 1 is safe to enter. So your lateral aspect of the brainstem, anywhere in the midbrain, in the pons, in the medulla, is safe to enter. Zone 2 has entry through designated safe areas. You can only enter through these zones, otherwise you will cause a problem. And zone 3 is basically no entry. So let's look at how do you approach each lesion in the brainstem, and we'll divide them into the midbrain, pons, and the medulla. So when you look at the cut section of the midbrain, these are the 3 circles that show where you can enter the midbrain. So this is through your lemniscal triangle. This is your zone 1. This is a very rare trajectory. Both these are rare trajectories that we use. This is through near the lateral to the medial to the oculomotor nerve, as I will show you. And this is through the collicular region. And these are the structures that you will encounter when you're going through this. So basically, when you enter from the lateral side, you have to be careful of the red nucleus and the medial lemniscus. And this is your substantia nigra. So let's look at it. Look at the zones, look at the entry points one by one. So this is from your ventral aspect. This is a very rarely used approach when you have a tumor in the ventral part of the midbrain. The entry point is through here. It is just medial to your oculomotor nerve, and it is in the medial 1/5 of your cerebral peduncle. This constitutes your frontopontine fibers, and they are relatively less eloquent, so it is safer to enter here. Once you make this entry in this area, you see that the area is bounded laterally by your oculomotor nerve, medially by your corticospinal tract, and in depth by your red nucleus. So this is the area where you can enter, and if you have a tumor in this region, you can go from this zone. Now, these are the more common varieties of tumors that you see. This you see in the lateral aspect of the midbrain here. And the approach that we use for these tumors is the supracerebellar approach. And you can enter this tumor from the lateral aspect of the midbrain from zone 1, as I said. So where is this area? This is near the lemniscal triangle. So you have the lateral lemniscus, you have the boundaries are the lateral lemniscus, the sulcus of the lateral lemniscus, the inferior brachii here, and inferiorly you have the superior cerebellar peduncle. So once you enter here, it is relatively safe, but in the depth you have to be careful of the red nucleus and the medial lemniscus. These are the colliculi, superior and inferior colliculi. So how do we enter in this area? You go through a supracerebellar approach. This is the cerebellum that has been depressed down. You can see the cranial nerves in this area. This is the 4th nerve, this is the 10th. And once you depress it more, you can see this beautiful location where it is safe to enter the lateral part of the brainstem, and you will not cause any problem when you enter from this area here. You can see the 4th nerve running beautifully here. You can see the superior and inferior calliculi. So all this area is accessible by the supracerebellar avenue. Now what happens when the tumor projects through the cerebral peduncle? You can still enter from laterally, but your approach differs. So you can see the DTI image here showing the tracks have been displaced medially and posteriorly by the tumor. And the approach that you can use for this is subtemporal approach. And you can see the beautiful anatomy that is visible by this approach. This is the tentorial hiatus, the tent pulled down. You can see the PCOM, the PCA, the 3rd nerve, and this is the region of the brainstem. And if you take a closer view, this is the region of the brainstem where you can enter and safely enter and approach this tumor. Again, the limits in the depth will be your red nucleus and the medial lemniscus. The last part of the midbrain is your dorsal midbrain or your tectum and tectal plate lesions. So if you have a lesion here, the approach is through the supracerebellar avenue through a midline approach here. And here you can see the cut section here, where if you enter the colliculi, I will show you where you will reach. So this is your dorsal aspect of the midbrain. This is your pineal body. This is your superior colliculus. So the region, the incision can be made in the superior aspect of the superior colliculus or on the inferior aspect of the inferior colliculus, just lateral to the frenulum and above the trochlear nerve. So this is the trochlear nerve running. This is the frenulum villi. And you can make this incision here below in the inferior colliculus or superior to the superior colliculus. And the structures that will be present in the depth are your aqueduct here, and you will have your medial lemniscus in this area, and you will have your central tegmental tract in that area. So this much area is accessible when you go through the supra or the infracollicular approach. Now we've done with the midbrain. Now let's get on to the pons. As you can see, the anterior ventral aspect of the pons is completely filled with fibers of the transverse pontine fibers and the corticospinal tracts You have the corticopontine tract, and you have the corticonuclear fibers running to the brainstem nuclei. So generally, throughout the brainstem, not even the pons, the ventral aspect of the brainstem is not a very good area to enter. This is the cut section of the brainstem of the pons, and you can see the transverse pontine fibers and the intermegal pontine nuclei in this region. And these are the structures that will come on the cut section of your pons, and you can see the medial lemniscus, the fourth ventricle, the superior cerebellar peduncle, and the middle cerebellar peduncle. And these are your pontine nuclei and transverse pontine fibers. So if you have a lesion in the pons, in the lateral aspect of the pons, this is going right up to the middle cerebellar peduncle. You can see the DTI that is displacing your corticospinal tract, and this is your lesion. So the approach would be through a CP angle, where this is your choroid plexus, and you have the 7th, 8th complex and the flocculonodular lobe coming here. So just anterior to that, you will get this region. This is the peritrigeminal area, and this is your safe entry zone into the pons. This entry should be made just in this area. It should not be made too posteriorly, nor should it be made too inferiorly. If you go inferiorly, you will damage fibers of the facial nerve. If you go again inside here in the depth, you will damage fibers of the 6th and 7th. So this is the area, anterior and inferior to the trigeminal nerve, where you can make your incision into the middle cerebellar peduncle. And this is the intraoperative view, where you can see from a retrosigmoid approach, the cerebellum has been retracted. And here you can see the bulge of the pons with the tumor. And you can approach it from here. Then you have a lesion like this. This is a cavernoma. Of course, you can also approach it from the retrosigmoid. But just to see, I've showed you showed this image for the dorsal approach. So this is your classical safe entry zone that you call from the dorsal aspect of the pons. So suprafacial and infrafacial, your safe entry zone. So this is your abducens nucleus. This is your facial nucleus, and the fibers are coming all the way here. They're turning superiorly and then again coming out as the facial nerve in this region. So this is your suprafacial area. The boundaries of this are your sulcus limitans, your median sulcus, and the inferior boundary is your fibers of the facial nerve. And this is your infrafacial zone. That is your medial sulcus here, sulcus limitans, and the superior boundary is the, again, turning fibers of the facial nerve. So these are the most common used. But mind you, when the cavernoma is enlarging the pons, you actually are not able to sometimes see these areas. You will not be able to identify. Sometimes if you see the stria medullaris, maybe it will help you to identify. So the trick is probably to be just lateral to the midline, above the stria terminalis, medullaris when you are in the infrafacial zone, and quite above the stria medullaris when you're trying to go suprafacial. So this is a dorsal view of the brainstem from the posterior midline suboccipital approach. And here you can see the bulge. It is very difficult sometimes to identify the anatomy. So you can just make a small incision in the area and enter. And lastly, we have to see the medulla. And this is the cut section of the medulla where you see the pyramids, the medial lemniscus, the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So medullary tumors are difficult because of their location and the critical cranial nerve nuclei in that region. So this is a medullary lesion, and you can see that this is the lesion here. The tracts are pushed anteriorly. So you can approach this lesion from a posterior aspect. So a classical midline suboccipital approach. And this is your exposure that you will see. And the entry point is generally to the posterior median sulcus or the posterior lateral sulcus. And that is the way where you should enter the medulla. And you should enter it below the obex. If for more laterally located lesion, you can again go from the cerebellar medullary fissure from a retrosigmoid approach. And for anterior placed lesions, these are not usually used, but the safe approaches are through the pre-olivary sulcus and the post-olivary sulcus. In the pre-olivary sulcus, the incision is just below the hypoglossal nerve rootlets. And in the post-olivary sulcus, it is ventral to the glossopharyngeal, vagus, and accessory nuclei. So thank you very much. This is my surgical anatomy of the brainstem.
Thanks, Abida. I think we are now all set to go inside the brainstem for the surgery. And I'm sure Vlad is waiting to go in there as soon as possible. So thanks. It was a really nice demonstration. And I'm sure there will be plenty of questions, but we'll have all of them after we finish our talks. So It's my pleasure to introduce, well, Vlad is already introduced, I think, introduced the fact that he's going to talk to us on cavernomas of brainstem and his philosophy. He's also written a book on this, which is published a couple of years ago. And I'm sure you probably are familiar with some of his ideas, but let's see what he has to offer. Thanks.
Thank you, Chandra. There was a nice introduction. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to talk, and it's not easy after these two young people to give some more info. But I'm going to talk about the cavernomas, especially of brainstem, and then I will raise few questions which I still do not have clear in my mind, and I hope that there will be a discussion about it. There will be about the approaches. Cavernoma surgery is really about the approach. To resect the cavernoma is nothing that difficult. The difficult sometimes is to approach the cavernoma. And you would always like to find the shortest way via non-eloquent areas. You might use navigation, of course. Endoscopic assistance is paramount at the end of surgery. We sometimes use intraop MR just to seek and find a small lesion in the depth. It really helps with bone wax cylinders, which are like fiducials there. And definitely there are individual indications, especially in deep and brainstem cavernomas. Not all cavernomas need surgery. Actually, I believe that less cavernomas need surgery than we really believe. And what's important and what I would like to stress most is that there is not only one avenue to the lesion. There are more avenues, and everyone should choose the one which he or she feels the most comfortable with. Of course, the risk of the surgery must be lower than that of the natural course. But our data on a natural course are rather hazy. It is published that the lobar cavernomas yearly risk of rupture is less than 1%. Morbidity and mortality of this rupture is not really known. Of course, there is epilepsy. In brainstem, it is 6, and the highest number is 36% per year, which doesn't sound to me rather well, but probably these high numbers are given by the fact that almost all cavernomas in the brainstem which rupture are symptomatic, since the functions and fibers and everything is compressed on a very small area. We know nothing about the natural course of spinal cord cavernomas, but definitely morbidity, mortality of these ruptures is rather high. And then we always discuss the cavernomas of the brainstem, and we discuss the cavernomas of the lobes. We somehow forget the cavernomas which are in the deep structures, in the area of internal capsule. And these are highly eloquent areas, and they are somehow taken out of the statistics. This is what one can achieve. Those are figures which are more than 5 years old now. And what's prominent is that with the brainstem cavernomas, one might expect rather high morbidity mortality rate. Actually, most of this is, as you will see later, early in the series. Now we are much safer and much more efficient with brainstem cavernomas. Spinal cord, only one patient deteriorated, and in all other cavernomas, the results are excellent, and every neurosurgeon loves them, of course. Just to follow what I'm thinking about the approaches and how do I approach the cavernoma, I have taken this example, which is not the brainstem, but which probably will show the best what we should take into consideration. First is the two-point technique. From one end of the longest axis of the cavernoma, prolong it to the surface, and that should be your approach. Not always applicable. Then the CSF spaces, sulci, ventricles, whatever CSF space might help you. Check this triangular space in the middle of, at the mid part of the hemisphere. So in this case, there are several approaches. You can come from anterior to this sulcus, from lateral from this sulcus no one would choose because it's really motor area. And you can come from all other directions. See the functional MR. It's really the cavernoma covered by the functions. Here is the tractography. It's better seen here. The green is leg, the violet is arm, and you see that the cavernoma virtually is enveloped by this. Thus, our approach was from the contralateral side using the triangular space of CSF, which was well seen on the previous image. So this is the train of thought to choose the way which is the least invasive, the most logical, and the shortest. The next technique you may use is the line of dissection. You will follow this line of dissection in this cavernoma. So if you just prolong it superiorly, you end up with transcortical direct approach, which is this. And you have your line of dissection directly in front of you, and you just follow it. Now coming to the brainstem. Exactly as Abida has said, you are looking for the safe entry zones. I believe that these safe entry zones are on the lateral aspect of the brainstem, not on the dorsal aspect. I hate the approach through the floor of the fourth ventricle, unless the cavernoma abuses that. So this cavernoma, what you will check, it's mesencephalic thing. Here it looks that you would have to traverse everything, but then there is this image, and see just exactly as Abida has said, you will come from here. From where? In this case, we have selected suboccipital approach, and this is it. You have the tentorium here. Here is the opening of the brainstem, which is like a puncture at the beginning, and you just slowly enlarge it, and there is the cavernoma, which was being resected. And this is the post-op, and see where we were, quite deep in the brainstem, with no consequences to the patient. And here is the approach from a lateral side of the brainstem. This is the fourth ventricle cavernoma. You could come with telovelar approach, or as we did from supra-infra approach. This is the mesencephalon, is the cerebellum. We did a short incision, in paravermian incision into the cerebellum. We do not anymore use midline approach for supra-infra, only lateral. It's much easier and much more logical and shorter. And although the steepness of the tentorium helps, this is the cavernoma in the floor of the fourth ventricle. And here is something which I look for very actively. All these veins, you must preserve them, and somehow I believe that all cavernomas of the brainstem do have these venous anomalies, and they should be protected by all means. Of course, there would be any other approach. You could go from below, and I believe that you would do the same job as I did from supra-infracerebral. So it's really a preference of each individual surgeon. You see that this is the only incision into the neural tissues. This one, which looks very similar, again at the upper part of the fourth ventricle, but there is the other cavernoma. So once going there, we wanted to resect both. So we resected the one in the fourth ventricle by teloveral approach rather easily. We were unable to find this small one in the cerebellum. So what we did, this is intra-op MR with bone wax fiducials, and this helped us to find the cavernoma ultimately. Usually you are there like 1 or 2 millimeters from the cavernoma, and you just miss it. This is the final image. This is the pontine cavernoma, and I believe that almost everybody who's listening to this lecture would go via retrosic approach. But if you check your tentorium, it really is attached to tentorium between these two arrows, and you very easily get to this spot via supracerebral infratentorial approach. And this is the day after. Just via supracerebral infratentorial approach, the only thing is the bottom of the resection cavity, which is less well seen with supra-infra than with retrosic, but you have your endoscope assistance, and then you can check the whole cavity easily. Another case of the upper mesencephalic cavernoma. In this case, we selected supratentorial approach via the temporo-occipital junction. This is after, And the guy came this year with the relapse of the cavernoma, nearly in the same place as was the first one, but much deeper. And depends who would be doing it again, would choose his approach. I was very much considering the original approach via the subtemporal occipital region, but then we decided for supra-infra cutting the tentorium, going through there. Again, on the pre-op image, you do not see the vein, but there is a major vein there. This is the cavernoma, and this is the cavity being overlooked by the endoscope. And this is the final image. The patient had an increase in his hemiparesis, and he had a double vision prior to surgery. After the surgery, both these symptoms worsened, but it's slowly recovering. And even if your patient is doing worse after brainstem cavernoma surgery, you might be sure that he will improve within 4-5 months after the surgery. Another one in the posterior thalamus, and again the same approach via supracerebral infratentorial route, cutting the tentorium. So this is, we still do it in the sitting position. I feel that this is best. We start with lumbar drain, because you do not hit any major CSF spaces to release the fluid. So we do lumbar drain to have at least some cerebral laxity at the beginning of surgery. This is cutting the tentorium as we get higher up into the region of the posterior thalamus. This is the Rosenthal vein, one of the branches of the posterior cerebral artery, and you already see the yellowish tissue of the cavernoma, and you easily can enter the basal ganglia through this approach, resecting the cavernoma, which is already in a way routine, and overlooking the whole cavity by endoscope. And this usually gives you a good feeling after the surgery that you know that you haven't overlooked anything there. And you will now see the whole incision into the brainstem, which is rather negligible. The patient after the surgery had hemihypesthesia. You see the entry point, which cleared over the next 6 months, and now the lady is completely without any deficit. This is the most important critique of supra-infracerebral approach, that you work with your hands above your head, which is not true. It's perfectly horizontal, and this is exactly the approach. Even through the tentorium, when you need to get higher up, you still are comfortable, and it's still very ergonomic. This is the post-op image of the lady, the immediate one and the late control. This is one of the rare instances where I use retrosec approach, because it's not my preferable. I either go from above or from below, which is the enough lateral approach, but this is directly in the midpoint of the pons. So we came in via retrosec approach above the 6th nerve. This is the cavernoma over here, and you will see it after the at the end of the surgery. And you see the basilar artery. This is the 6th nerve, this is ICA, and this is the 7th, 8th nerve, and you easily get over there via this retrosec approach. But as I said, this is very, very rare in my practice to use this approach. What's difficult quite frequently with cavernomas are the post-op MR, because there's still some hemosiderin is left in the vicinity of cavernoma. So the interpretation of the MRs after the surgery are sometimes difficult, and only consequent follow-ups give you good feeling that you really resected what you should have. This is a young boy of 18 who had a sudden headache and hearing decrease. The cavernoma is directly where the 8th nerve leaves the pons. This is the cavernoma over here. This is 7th, 8th. You see the cavity after the resection, that it really was at the transition between the brainstem and the 8th nerve. This is after surgery, and rather surprisingly, the hearing improved after surgery. Another case which is rather bizarre in a way, the patient was taken to MR because of headaches, and there was only this venous anomaly, which is rather major. You see that it's nothing for surgery, but 5 years later he came in with this bleeding from tiny cavernoma, which we evacuated, and we never really found any piece of cavernoma that was nowhere to be seen, and we checked the cavity perfectly. The patient was doing well, but 2 years later he came in with this rather grown cavernoma, and this already is a case where it's a little lower in the brainstem, but still in the area of the meatus. This is the 7th-8. So again, retrosec approach. You see the two huge veins above the cavernoma, one huge vein below the cavernoma. So in between them, the cavernoma was resected. You see the 7th-8 here. The patient had after surgery minor 7th nerve palsy, which improved over time. And this is the overlooking the cavity with endoscope, and this is the whole cavity of the cavernoma, and you see the veins above and below. And after the first surgery, this was quite a difficult dissection. I may show you the video, because whenever I took my dissection, I found a vessel, a major vein. It was everywhere, and the scarring after the first surgery was very unpleasant, but finally we did our job, and the patient is doing rather well. You see the vein above, another vein below. It is the 7th-8 going along, and this is the gliotic tissue along with the cavernoma. And since the patient is now doing well, I just hope that he will never ever turn up again with some relapse of the cavernoma. Let's go forward. This is after surgery. No, this is already another case, sorry. And this is a rare case where we go through the floor of the fourth ventricle when the cavernoma really is on the surface. And you see here that this is the floor of the fourth ventricle being monitored now, and here's the cavernoma protruding from the brainstem. So this is a case for really fourth ventricle floor approach. This is the hematoma. After you remove it, you will see the cavernoma itself, which was resected. And when we then stimulated the bottom of the cavity, that was the 7th nerve nucleus. But fortunately, this was without any deficit. Probably we were lucky. You see, this is at the bottom. Let's go. This is after surgery. The case. We go lower. In fact, the pontine cavernomas, in my mind, are divided into upper, middle, and lower third. And according to this division, you get your approach for upper supra infra, for midpoint retrosec, and for this lower, it will be the far lateral approach, which I call far enough lateral, because you do not need to resect that much of a condyle, because you work almost exclusively above the condyle. So again, this is the cavernoma, and you need to get to this spot at the bottom of the pons. It's just below the 9, 10, 11. The cavernoma is covered by the ependyma only. You are inside the cavernoma. Let's see the short video. So you see the approach. What's paramount is that the skull base of the occiput is really flush and drilled as much as possible. Not the condyle. You do not need to drill condyle that much. What you need is this area, so that you can retract a bit the cerebral tonsile. You get to this 9th and 11th. You will see the pica, and you have a good control of all the vessels there. And if you dissect the arachnoid properly, you really find everything. This is the meatus with 7th, 8th nerve. Here already is the cavernoma appearing, but we then lifted a bit 9th, 10th, 11th, and there was really only the ependyma covering the cavernoma. And this is already inside the lesion. And again, the resection is as in any other case of cavernoma, that you remove it piecemeal and whenever possible, you get the hematoma by gentle traction without any damage. And this is after surgery. This one was left behind. This is the upper cervical cord cavernoma, which may be considered a bit of brainstem too. The patient was 18 years old and he was on a national team in ice hockey. And ice hockey in my country is probably #2 sport, so very prominent guy. And the only symptom was that after the practice he had a neck pain. So someone showed him the DMR and this was found. I didn't want to do any surgery. I was really afraid of the cavernoma, but finally the parents persuaded me. So first approach was far lateral, and I saw the cavernoma, but whenever I touched the lesion, the MEPs dropped down. And being more or less not a pilot of a jet fighter, but a pilot of the airline, I went back. I quit the surgery, and we came in another 2 months via the midline approach through the cord, exactly below the calamus, below the obex, and we resected the cavernoma through this midline approach. And this is the final image. The spinal cord is nearly divided in two, but the patient is doing perfectly well, playing ice hockey again without any troubles. Morbidity, mortality in spinal cord, there was only one patient who came to us after these 2 cavernomas were already resected, and he came in with this one, being on a wheelchair with unusable motor function, and then after surgery, his upper extremity on the right decreased a bit. So I would say that there was a decrease of McCormick scale by 1, but it's not really put there. Okay, let's talk about the dynamics of the disease, which is a rather important issue, which I do not have clear. So I would like to hear the opinions. The same cavernoma, and there's 10 years in between. Never ever bled, never ever any problems, never ever any surgery. On the border of internal capsule, so it will be rather dangerous. So we are still following the patient, and the patient is doing well. So there are many observed cavernomas which we never operated because of the advanced stage, concomitant diseases, or location, which never really forced us to do any surgery. And I just counted through 1 year, there were in between 40 and 50 cavernomas coming to my outpatient clinic just for follow-ups, never ever being operated. And actually there are more of these than those who really were operated ultimately. This one, I wouldn't dare to go through the midline of the fourth ventricle. On the other hand, this is our pituitary patient. So we have a very nice sequence. This is 2011. He's doing perfectly well. 2012, still perfectly well. This is, I guess, 2014. And you see that something is already happening here. 2014 later on in December. And you see that there is already cavernoma appearing, being full grown in another 6 years. We resected that. The patient was doing well. In another 2 years, he came in with major bleeding, major relapse, and the patient ultimately died. So these are two just the opposite cases, and there must be something which we still do not know about, and we do not have any means how to differentiate them, how to differentiate those which will never rupture and those which grow like crazy, like this one. You see. Then the multiplicity. There are 2 types of multiplicity, successive and really multiple from the very beginning. If you have such a patient, you do not need any other patients throughout your practice because you can operate on him all the time. This girl came to us when she was 15. She was operated elsewhere, and the surgeon said that it's an AVM, that it's bleeding, which he cannot control. So he closed the wound. They performed angiography. There was nothing. But still, she got this ticket of inoperable AVM. And there was her mother who called us that the girl is having weakly rupture. So she came in, we resected the cavernoma. In 2 years' time, she had another one over here. We resected this one rather easily. But she was back in 2017, 2 kids later, being adult woman now, with these 2 cavernomas which grew as new ones. We've resected them both, and now we are expecting her to come again with another one. So we call her for a regular check, but when it will appear, difficult to establish, because there was 15 years meanwhile between the 2. Then if you have more cavernomas, of course you will go only for the ruptured one or symptomatic one. This is a young guy with epileptic seizure after surgery. Then epilepsy. If you have a cavernoma which is symptomatic with epileptic seizures, should we go for epilepsy surgery with all the monitoring and with all the workup, which is rather sophisticated and time-lasting, or should we go for cavernoma surgery only? This is something I do not know what approach should be taken. And we have patients from both sides of spectrum, some of them directly as cavernoma with epileptic seizure, and some of them are coming through our epileptologists like epilepsy surgery. The final result is exactly the same, because even in epilepsy surgery, we just resect the cavernoma. We do not extend the resection. So this is a male, 24 years, with really intractable epileptic seizures, who came in with this huge cavernoma. And here I was stopped by our electrophysiologist that the MEPs are decreasing. So we left behind this piece of cavernoma at the depths of the major one. But we really helped the guy because he now symptom epileptic seizure free. So this probably was really like epilepsy surgery. And we even monitored electrocorticography, and all the spikes disappeared. So that was a good job. And that was really epilepsy surgery, not the cavernoma surgery. And then timing, especially in brainstem cavernomas. Whether we should go for them as they rupture or whether we should wait. I'm on the side of waiting at least 2-3 weeks, because then the walls of the cavity are firm and you do not fight the mellitic tissue with bleeding, and you just resect the cavernoma rather easily. You shouldn't wait long, because hematoma will get too firm and even calcified if the patient comes longer. But I'm really not friend of this emergency surgeries, because then you hardly control the bleeding from the surrounding tissue, and actually that is not the bleeding from the cavernoma, that is the bleeding which you caused by your surgery. We've published our series in ACTA a while ago, and this is just to remind you of our morbidity mortality. And now let me tell you what that morbidity mortality was, and that's really a lesson which we have. Two large veins on the surface of the cavernoma, of the pontine cavernoma, approached through the floor of the fourth ventricle, and it was in 1999. And I was not well aware about the importance of the veins, and I told them I had to coagulate them, and the patient died. The other one came quadriparetic, again approached through the floor of the fourth ventricle, and he died 7 days after the surgery without any improvement. And in 4 cases where we called the new major deficit, all of them were again approached through the floor of the fourth ventricle. And that was the end. That was something like 2003, 2004, when we last approached the cavernoma, which was not on the surface through the floor of the fourth ventricle. We always go from the side whenever possible. Okay, to summarize, check the CSF spaces, cistern, sulci, ventricles, to determine your approach. 2-point technique or line of dissection technique, both are helpful, and both will tell you which route to choose. Of course, eloquency of approach, whether you are close to eloquent areas, whether there are some important structures, and in brainstem, they are everywhere. And of course, familiarity with the given route. You must be familiar with supra-infra approach, familiar with far lateral approach, to get to the side of the brainstem to get to your target. So all put together gives you the best approach. And that you have chosen the wrong one, you always know only with the hindsight. You never know it prior. So cavernoma surgery in general, it's about the decision and about the approach. And let me make a little commercial. In September, there should be a book from Springer out from us on cavernomas. So make your choice and buy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you for the fantastic experience over several years. And there is no question, there is so much to learn from your experience and from your dedicated work. The most important thing is, how we have seen so many fibers going through the brainstem, but how your manipulation of the cavernoma, despite so much manipulation, the patient comes out so well. The possibility of complications are so low as we have seen. So cavernoma, brainstem cavernoma surgery is indeed there to stay. And before I move on to Dr. Dev Pujari, there is one question which Vladimir, there is a question on the list. Is there any role for radiosurgery for brainstem cavernoma? Do you think you can answer quickly before we move on?
Very shortly and very concisely, no.
Okay, very good. This is the most biggest answer you have given. Okay, so the panelists will please hold on and we move on to our next presenter, Dr. Chandrasekhar Dev Pujari. Dr. Dev Pujari, please go ahead.
I think Vladimir, you have to unshare first.
I'm looking where to unshare. Stop share. Okay, sorry. Sorry, Chandra.
I just thought that I'll share some cases which will throw light on some of the points which Vladimir has already spoken, and something which has struck me. This is a 14-year-old boy, and he has had his first surgery for a cavernous angioma at the age of 12. And over the last 3 years, the previous 3 years before this boy, I operated about 4 years ago now. He has had at least 3 episodes where he repeatedly kept on worsening, and the size of the cavernoma kept on increasing. And you can see it's a fairly large cavernoma occupying the CP angle, the lower pons, and the natural approach, of course, is here to go through the retrosigmoid. And this is what we did. And you have shown a very, very similar video, Vladimir. What happens is with repeated bleeds, it becomes like such a granulation tissue that in this rich area, not only of brainstem, but also of nerves, and occasionally, as you showed, some veins, it becomes extremely difficult to keep on doing a good dissection and make sure that you can save all the nerves, you do not damage any important veins, and you manage to get a reasonably good plane towards the end, which is what we did. And this boy took, this is after a complete excision. So unless you manage to get a complete excision, in many cases, it can recur. And brainstem already seems to have shown more propensity for recurrent bleeding, and therefore it is important to remove them completely. But I think rather than allowing them to bleed several times and make it a difficult surgery, I think one has to seriously think that you have to do it electively. This is another patient where you have shown a beautiful surgery by the supracerebellar approach, that the midbrain cavernoma was removed. This was a patient who presented to us mainly with upward gaze paresis and headaches. And we were just thinking of how to reach this. When this patient developed another bleed, he had another episode of worsening. And you can see with that, the ventricles have also become slightly enlarged. You can see indentation onto the third ventricle. And here, I thought I could probably do it in a little different way. And I went actually transcallosal, transventricular in this patient. You can see the supratentorial approach. I'm going callosal, and I have gone like what you do in endoscopy, or you go from an anterior approach and take your trajectory towards the pineal. And after opening the anterior part of the corpus callosum, I have then extended the head of the patient, and I'm going down, and I'm seeing where I'm reaching, and you can start seeing the discoloration into the floor. And then we have opened the floor over there. Uh, as soon as you open the floor there, the blood clot starts coming out. And you can see the further dissection. Uh, the twice blade cavernous angioma has actually got quite a firm wall. It's multi-lobulated. And you can see that with patients, you can find, make a plane all around it. And you can virtually, so another approach to remove this highly higher placed into the midbrain without getting into the colliculus and without getting into eye movement disturbance is probably to get it through the ventricle. And this is also one of the corridors which I have used, in fact, in 2 patients so far. You can see the whole cavity so that you have not left anything behind. You don't want to come back again to do this. And after irrigation, I think this should be the end of surgery here. This is the post, and this patient actually did quite well and improved in about 3 weeks time, and could be sent home. I don't have a post operative picture here. I should have it, I don't know. This is probably the post-operative, no. Right. So this is another patient. This is actually a 19-year-old girl who came to us with acute deterioration in her cranial nerve function and became gradually quadruplegic in our observation. Within 48 hours after admission, this girl actually required to be intubated. And as Vladimir said, we also don't like to operate the patient in the first 2 or 3 weeks. But in this particular patient, so this is a very rare kind of a situation where we had to operate in almost an acute phase. This is the 5th post-operative day when we operated on this girl. And we had to go into the 4th ventricular floor, but we have gone as laterally as possible. And through a suprafacial approach, we have been able to get into this blood clot. And the typical problem which Vladimir has said is that, you know, once you start removing this, the wall is not firm enough and it keeps on collapsing on you. When you are trying to remove this, it keeps on collapsing on you, and it becomes very difficult to keep it patent. And it is important that you want to remove the whole thing, you want to see the whole thing, and you cannot actually use a retractor inside the brainstem to do that. So you need to just manage it with your suction and with your tumor forceps and try to remove this. And we eventually managed to remove this completely and see the whole wall of the white matter inside. But you can see it's a very large, and probably very rare occasions you find that a patient continues to deteriorate, and that can be a rare indication for surgery, like what we had to do in this particular patient. She actually came out of the ventilator on about 7th day, and in about 3 weeks time, she could go home on a wheelchair, and she could stand and walk a little bit with support. And it took her almost 3 months to get back to normal eating, drinking, and being on her own. Post-operative scan, you can see some hemosiderin there, but she's done well. The third patient I wanted to show a little different variety of cavernous angioma. This 60-year-old man came to me with a cystic lesion like this, which did not show any which hyperintensity on uh, T2 weighted images, did not see very clearly as a hemorrhage, but when you did a gradient echo image, you can see that there has been hemorrhage. And we now have about 8 patients of cystic cavernous angioma, largely cystic cavernous angioma, and this seems to be one of them. So we did a tractography and we decided that this patient we are going to do by what Abida very elegantly showed as the approach just below the trigeminal entry, root entry zone. Because that seems to be the best place where the cavernous angioma is coming around. So angle approach being made just below the fifth nerve to get into this tumor. And I am using a round dissector to make that opening, and a small opening just below the origin of the fifth nerve, and we are able to get the cystic component of the cavernoma first, and then the cavernoma comes out well. The only problem I find with this approach, I have used this now about 3 or 4 times, but I think the vision can still be a problem because your angulation, however well you angulate the microscope, it can sometimes be difficult to see into the depth of the lesion unless the walls remain open quite firmly. So probably a delayed surgery may be a good idea even in such patients. And you can see now that the cavity is completely without stain, and we thought we have removed the whole thing. The post-operative scan looked very well. Post-operatively, the patient looked very well. He could move his eyes in all directions. He could smile properly, and there was absolutely no neurological deficit in this patient. And this is what you saw with beautiful dissection images just before. However, the Zabramovsky's classification, which is commonly used for cavernous angioma, does not really describe cystic cavernous angiomas. And a newer paper by Michael Lawton has probably talked about it, but again, a very small number of cases. One of the problems which has been shown, out of our 8 patients, 2 patients have rebled, and this is this second patient. This patient actually, just when he was supposed to go home, became worse, and he rebled. And we did a DSA just to make sure that we were not missing anything. And then we went back, obviously the same approach, and we could remove the clot. And this time we thought we got the proper capsule of the lesion, which we thought we did not remove it earlier. But this is one real problem. And therefore, I'm just wondering that one of the cases I have done by a pre-sigmoid approach. In this patient, the sinus was too big and I did not try that, but there you can probably get a more direct approach. So though the bone work may be a little more, to do this kind of approach, it may be better to go pre-sigmoid rather than go retrosigmoid. That is the impression I have got. So if the mastoid is favorable, if the sinuses are favorable, this approach may be better done with a pre-sigmoid approach. That's what my feeling is. So this is the last portion coming out, and that's the capsule coming out. And this is the post-operative scan. He has still not had a post-operative MR yet. So there are only about largest series is about 25%, 25 patients of cystic cavernous angiomas. And we are hoping to get our work presented very soon. The pathophysiology of cystic degeneration probably is recurrent minor hemorrhages, and the osmotic pressure across probably causes fluid to accumulate, but we really do not know. And this is not restricted only to brainstem. I have recently seen a girl who came actually with visual failure and a large lesion here in the basifrontal lobe. In fact, because of the darkness here, it was thought that this could be calcium and this could be a craniopharyngioma. But we saw that this was not actually calcium. And then when we operated on this patient, I'll probably, yes. You can see that this was another large cyst, and after draining the cyst, you could see the cavernous angioma into the anteroinferior wall of the cyst, and you can see the multiple, the typical honeycombing into that. So there was no doubt that this was another cavernous angioma, which was largely cystic, but also had a classic component along with it. Sometimes the classic component may be very, very small, as we had in 5 of our patients, but you can have a combination of the two. And this is the histopathology, and this is the 3-month later scan, which seems to be quite good. So we still don't have a clear epidemiology, but you can get such odd cases occasionally. And I thought I would just share these cases with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shekhar, for that wonderful presentation and very fantastic, very complex cases that you have collected. Now, there are a few questions on the panel, and one question is, I will combine the 3 questions, one from Dr. Muthukumar and one from Saida from Pakistan. The question that I will combine and ask you and Dr. Vladimir, that what about venous angiomas associated with cavernomas? How do you investigate them? How do you diagnose them? Whether there is, you do any kind of angiography you would like to see, or whether you just diagnose it on MRI, and how you handle them. So this is the question.
Okay, well, I check the MR. We do not do angiography. I check the MR, and most frequently you can see the anomaly. You will find it, and you know where is it located. And actually, sometimes it even determines your approach, just to avoid the anomaly. If I do not see it on pre-op MR in all brainstem cavernomas, I'm trying to find it actively. You know, like in the case of mesencephalic cavernoma, the recurring one, it was not seen on pre-op MR, but I knew, or I suspected that it should be there, and we really found it. I don't really look for it to find it outside the cavernoma, but where the cavernoma is. If while resecting the cavernoma, I'm checking whether there is not a vein all the time, if I do not know about it in advance.
You will not like to take the vein, eh, Vladimir?
Of course not.
Okay.
Now,
No,
Vladimir,
it must be preserved at all costs.
I'm sure you must have read the paper written by our friend who used to be in Marburg earlier in Zurich. The name escapes me right now. But Laffy, he's written a paper specifically that you should actually take the vein along with the cavernous angioma, which I was surprised because nobody else actually recommends it, and I have not tried to coagulate a vein in my own practice. But yes, you see the vein much more commonly in brainstem cavernomas than at most other places. I think that is absolutely remarkable.
Exactly. I do not remember the article saying that you must take out the vein. That must have been a crazy guy. And
he's written for Sylvian Fisher approach in basal ganglia cavernomas, and that you should take the vein in that. So come in neurosurgery.
Oh, that's really a radical treatment of cavernoma, because you will never see this cavernoma in this particular patient again. And one of the 2 patients who died in my series, it was exactly this, that I took out the venous anomaly and the patient died. So I'm so afraid of them that even the small veins I keep.
Okay, so next question is directed to Abida. Now, lesions located in anterolateral pons, what are the landmarks that will determine the surgical strategy?
Anterolateral pons, you must approach only from the lateral aspect, so from your middle cerebellar peduncle. And the safe entry point is just below the trigeminal nerve. There has also been some entry points described above the trigeminal nerve, but according to what anatomically we have found, is ventrally it will be bounded by your corticospinal tracts, and in the depth you will have all the lemnisci. So those are your boundaries, but you can safely enter it from the lateral aspect because the tracts will be pushed ahead. The corticospinal tracts will be medial and pushed ahead. So you can enter from the middle cerebellar peduncle.
Okay, so I do not have any more questions on the panel.
There is
Yes,
there is
Shekhar.
one question about can you really see from the pre-sigmoid approach? I had actually another video which I didn't put today. I mean, it is a little better to see, but it is always difficult to visualize laterally. And I think using endoscope in that situation may be a good idea, but again, you will need either an angled or a fiber optic endoscope to get into that kind of a cavity. So I really do not know an answer to that question.
Atul?
Yeah,
Can I ask?
yes.
I would like to ask Abida on something. Abida, if you have a tumor, cavernoma, whatever within the brainstem, the anatomy is distorted. Do you have any means how to determine the entry point by some electrophysiological monitoring or whatever during surgery?
Haven't tried it, but I think it should work because if you monitor the trigeminal nerve, if you're coming laterally or if you're coming ventrally, difficult, but if you're coming laterally and if you're going through the lemniscus, if you can use the auditory evoke potential and put it there, maybe you could get an insight from that. If you're near the trigeminal nerve, maybe you could monitor the trigeminal nerve with SSEP and then maybe you could get an insight from that. Of course, on the floor of the fourth ventricle, there are many motor nuclei and many things that you can test with intraoperative neurophysiology.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But from the side, if you would stimulate the area and you would get on the brainstem and you would get a response from the fifth nerve, would you take it as granted that you just should go a bit anteriorly, or?
I'm not sure, but what the safest would be to identify the root entry zone of the fifth and stay as inferior, just inferior and anterior to it. If you can identify the fifth nerve, that would be the best thing that you can do. Then, or something, just go below it or just antero-inferior to it.
Right. Okay.
Okay, Shekhar, you want to say something?
Well, I would just like to thank Vlad, especially for accepting our invitation and giving a wonderful talk today. I would like to thank Atul, of course, to spare time, and Abida and Sukhbir for a very, very good show. So thank you all the guys, and I hope it has been a useful discussion for the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, audience. The audience came in large numbers because masters were displaying their techniques. We got 562 logins today from 9 countries. We got 33 participants. So when Dr. Sukhdeep was showing his slides, I thought he was showing Roman sculptures in marble. And I was admiring the creator who designed this brainstem. And then Dr. Sukhdeep and Dr. Abida, who showcased the master creation in all the dissections and intricacies and glory. And then the 2 masters, Dr. Benes and Dr. Devpujari sir, showed us the approaches to how to maneuver and how to go through all this creation that God has created, and then take out the tumors, the cavernomas from that to cure the patients. Beautifully coordinated by another master, Dr. Atul Goyal, this entire episode of the webinar. We thank Dr. Devpujari sir to give us the opportunity to carry this webinar. I think the audience must have really enjoyed and got a lot of things to take home from this webinar. So this webinar came to you from Health and You Therapeutics in collaboration with New Link Company Limited, Japan. And we have just few products. We are also unique in our products. We launched it first time in India, many products. For example, Amitriptyline plus Mecobalamin, we launched it for the first time in India, this combination, Amnurite 5, 10 and 25 neuropathic pain, and for migraine and tension type of headache. We have Amitriptyline plus Propranolol for the first time in India, when migraines are not controlled by one, Amnurite beta 520ER and 1040ER. We have Amnurite P, pregabalin given in a sustained release form to match pharmacokinetic profile of Amitriptyline. It is pharmacological for severe neuropathic pain. We have Mecobalamin injection imported from Japan to give you highest quality. We have a new strength of clobazam for your epilepsy, 2.5 milligram, which was not there in India. So add clobaz 2.5, 5 and 10 to add flexibility and control in upper titration, down titration, and in BID dose. And recently we have launched vitamin therapy for migraine, Brentamine, Riboflavin 200, Magnesium 200, and CoQ10. Many more with your suggestions and advice. We would like to thank all the audience and all the speakers for letting us carry this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Deepak Naik signing off from Health and You, always together. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
See
you.
you guys again.
Yes, sir.
Sure soon.